the frontier, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. A young rancher named Silas Brennan lived alone on his family's property, untouched by a woman's hands, unprepared for what the wilderness would bring to his doorstep. When he found her stealing provisions from his storage shed under the pale morning light, he should have reached for his rifle. But something in the way she moved, something in the defiant set of her shoulders, froze him where he stood. She was Apache, a warrior, and the words she would speak to him days later would shatter every wall he had built around his lonely heart. What he didn't know was that Nakoha wasn't just hungry for food, and what she didn't know was that the virgin rancher watching her from the shadows would become the one thing more dangerous than any enemy her tribe had ever faced. Silas had been alone for 8 months since his father died from fever, leaving him the ranch and nothing else but silence. He woke each morning to emptiness, worked the land until his hands bled, and fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing. The isolation had become a second skin, comfortable in its predictability. No one came this far out. No one bothered him. Until the morning he heard something moving in his supply shed. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Bandits had been spotted 2 territories over, men who killed for less than a horse. His boots made no sound on the packed earth as he approached the weathered wooden structure. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside he could see a shadow moving between the sacks of grain and preserved goods. Silas raised the rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. Then the figure stepped into the light streaming through the doorway, and every thought in his head went silent. She was tall, taller than most women he had ever seen, with black hair that fell in a thick braid down her back. Her skin was sun-darkened, her features strong and angular. She wore leather clothing that had seen hard use, and across her back was a bow with a quiver of arrows. An Apache woman, alone, stealing from his supplies with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before. Their eyes met. Hers were dark, almost black, and they held no fear, only calculation. She was measuring him, deciding if he was a threat. Her hand didn't move toward her bow, but he could see the readiness in her body, the coiled tension of someone who knew how to kill. Silas should have shouted, should have ordered her off his land, should have fired a warning shot, but the words caught in his throat. There was something in her face, something raw and haunted that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. She turned away from him, deliberately, and picked up a sack of dried meat, not running, not asking permission, just taking what she needed as if he wasn't standing there with a rifle pointed at her back. His finger loosened on the trigger. "Wait." The word came out rougher than he intended. She froze, then slowly turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. One eyebrow raised in question, or challenge. He couldn't tell which. Silas lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking and he didn't know if it was from fear or something else entirely. "You don't have to steal it." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't trust him. He could see it in every line of her body, but she didn't leave either. She stood there, holding the sack of meat, waiting to see what he would do next, waiting to see if he was another white man with pretty words and ugly intentions. He took a step back, giving her space, giving her the option to run if she wanted. "Take what you need, just don't come back." For a long moment she stared at him. Then, without a word, she grabbed 2 more sacks, slung them over her shoulder with strength that shouldn't have surprised him but did, and walked past him out of the shed. So close he could smell sage and smoke on her skin. So close he could see the fine scar along her jawline. She didn't thank him, didn't look back, just walked toward the tree line where the wilderness began, her stride long and purposeful. He watched until she disappeared into the shadows between the cottonwoods, his heart still pounding, his mind full of questions he had no answers for. But what Silas didn't see was that 50 paces into the forest, Nakoha stopped. She set down the sacks and turned to look back at the ranch house, at the young man standing frozen by his supply shed. And for the first time in 6 months, something stirred in her chest that wasn't grief or rage. It was curiosity, and curiosity, she knew, was dangerous. 3 days passed before Silas saw her again. 3 days of checking over his shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of lying awake wondering if she would come back, wondering if he wanted her to. He was repairing the fence along the eastern pasture when he felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. His hands stilled on the rough wood, splinters pressing into his palms. He didn't turn around, didn't want to spook her if it was her, didn't want to seem afraid if it wasn't. Slowly, He went back to work, driving the wooden post into the hard ground with steady strikes of the mallet. Each impact sent vibrations up his arms. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool morning air. And through it all, he felt those eyes on him. After an hour, he couldn't take it anymore. He turned. She was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 paces away. Not hiding, just watching. The morning sun caught the sheen of her black hair, and even from this distance he could see the intensity in her gaze. She wasn't looking at him the way someone looks at a threat. She was studying him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. Their eyes locked. Neither moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Silas didn't have words for. His mouth went dry. His pulse kicked up in a way that had nothing to do with the physical labor. She tilted her head slightly, and the corner of her mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like she had discovered something amusing. Then she turned and disappeared back into the forest. Silas stood there, hammer hanging loose in his grip, his breath coming faster than it should. What was she doing? Why come back just to watch? The questions circled in his mind like buzzards over a carcass, picking at his concentration for the rest of the day. The next morning she was there again, this time closer, sitting on a fallen log just beyond his property line, arms crossed, watching him work on the corral gate. She made no attempt to hide, no pretense of secrecy, just sat there as bold as sunrise. He tried to ignore her. Lasted maybe 10 minutes before his curiosity won. He set down his tools and walked toward her, each step feeling like it carried more weight than it should. She didn't move, didn't react, just watched him approach with those dark, unreadable eyes. He stopped at the property line, an invisible boundary neither of them had crossed yet. Up close, he could see details he had missed before. The way her leather clothing was worn but well maintained, the slight calluses on her fingers, the way she held herself like a coiled spring, ready to explode into motion at any moment. "Why do you keep coming back?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with that same measuring gaze. When she finally spoke, her English was accented but clear. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Violence. Cruelty. The things white men usually offer." She stood, and he realized again how tall she was. Her eyes were almost level with his. "But you gave me food. You let me go. Why?" Silas swallowed hard. The question felt like a trap, but he didn't know how. "You looked like you needed it more than I did." Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but the hard edges seemed to blur slightly. "You live alone." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "So do I." She said it like a confession, like admitting to some kind of weakness she wasn't used to acknowledging. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. Silas could smell sage on her again, mixed with leather and something earthier, could see the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, could feel the heat radiating off her skin despite the cool air. "My name is Silas." She studied him for another long moment. Then, Nakoha. The name settled between them like a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward. She turned to leave, but this time she looked back at him before disappearing into the trees. And in that glance, Silas saw something that made his stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She would be back tomorrow, and he wouldn't be able to stop thinking about her until she was. She came back the next day at noon, when the sun was highest and the shadows shortest. But this time she didn't stay at the tree line. This time she walked straight across his property, past the corral, past the supply shed, right up to where he sat on the porch steps eating a piece of dried meat and stale bread. Silas froze, the bread halfway to his mouth. His heart hammered so hard he thought she might hear it. Nakoa stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look at her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "You are afraid of me," she said. Not a question, an observation. "I'm not." He stopped. Lying seemed pointless. "Maybe a little." "Good. Fear keeps you alive." She sat down beside him on the step, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his. Almost. The nearness made his skin prickle with awareness. "But that is not why your hands shake when I am near." Heat flooded his face. He set the bread down, suddenly having no appetite. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him fully, and the directness in her gaze stripped away every defense he might have tried to build. "You watch me the way a starving man watches food, the way a man in the desert watches water. Silas's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, wanted to stand up and walk away, wanted to do anything except sit there under the weight of her attention. But his body wouldn't cooperate. Nakoha leaned closer. Her breath was warm against his cheek. I have not lain with a man in 6 months. Not since my husband died. Do you know what 6 months of wanting feels like, Silas? The world narrowed to just the two of them. Just the heat of her body next to his. Just the low rasp of her voice speaking words that set fire to every nerve he had. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Tried again. I wouldn't know. She pulled back slightly, studying his face. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. Then something else. Something that might have been hunger. You have never been with a woman. It wasn't a question, but shame burned through him anyway. At 24 he should have done a lot of things. But living out here alone, no town for miles, no neighbors, no one but him and the land and the silence. No, he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Nakoha's hand came up, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been imagined. Except his skin burned everywhere she touched. That is not something to be ashamed of. Then why do I feel like it is? Because you think it makes you less. Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, and his breath caught. But maybe it makes you more. Before he could ask what she meant, before he could process the feeling of her hands on his skin, she stood abruptly. Her whole body went taut, head turning toward the eastern trees. Silas saw it then, what she had heard before him. Movement in the forest. Not one person, several. They are looking for me, Nakoha said, her voice gone flat and cold. The woman who had been touching his face was gone, replaced by the warrior he had first seen in his supply shed. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. Who? My people. I have been gone too long. She looked down at him, and for the first time he saw something like regret in her eyes. They will not understand why I am here. They will not understand you. 3 men emerged from the tree line. Apache warriors, weapons ready, faces hard with suspicion. They saw Nakoha standing over him, saw him sitting at her feet. The lead warrior's eyes narrowed, and he barked something in their language that Silas didn't understand but felt in his gut like a punch. Nakoha answered in the same language, her voice sharp and defiant. The warrior took a step forward, hand tightening on his bow. The other 2 fanned out, surrounding them. Silas stood slowly, hands visible and empty. His mind raced through options, none of them good. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat, could burn his ranch and ride away before anyone knew what happened. And Nakoha, standing between him and them, looked like she was weighing whether to fight or run. The lead warrior spoke again, and this time Nakoha's shoulders tensed. Whatever he said, it wasn't a request. It was a command. She turned to look at Silas one last time. In that look was everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building between them over these few short days. And something else, something that looked like a promise. Then she walked toward her people, and Silas's hands clenched into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to stop her, even though he knew it would mean his death. 2 nights later, Silas woke to the sound of something hitting his window. A pebble, then another. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the glass, heart pounding. In the moonlight, he saw her. Nakoha stood in his yard, face bruised along one cheekbone, breathing hard. She gestured urgently toward the house. He didn't think, just ran downstairs and threw open the door. She pushed past him, scanning the darkness behind her. They are coming, not far behind. What happened? I refused to marry the man they chose for me. Said I would choose my own path. She touched the bruise on her face without flinching. My brother did this. Said I dishonor our family, dishonor my dead husband's memory. Silas heard it then. Voices in the distance. The warriors were tracking her. The cellar, under the kitchen. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the small door in the floor. It's hidden under the rug. She hesitated, eyes meeting his. In them he saw something he hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, trust. She nodded and let him lead her down into the darkness. The space was tight, barely tall enough to stand in, lined with preserved goods and stores for winter. Silas climbed down after her and pulled the door shut above them, throwing the rug back in place. Darkness swallowed them whole. He could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, feel the heat of her body in the confined space. They were standing so close that when he shifted his weight, his chest brushed against her shoulder. They will search the house, she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. If they find us like this, Then we stay quiet. Footsteps above. Heavy boots crossing his floor. Silas's hand found Nakoha's in the dark, and she gripped it hard enough to hurt. Her other hand pressed against his chest, and he knew she could feel his heart hammering against her palm. Voices overhead, angry, searching, the sound of furniture being moved, glass breaking. They were tearing his house apart. Nakoha's fingers curled into his shirt, her body tense against his. In the pitch black, every other sense heightened. The sage smell of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the way her breath hitched when his thumb moved across her knuckles without him meaning it to. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The warriors moved through every room, came close to the kitchen twice. Silas held his breath each time, feeling Nakoha do the same. Their bodies pressed closer in the confined space. And even with the danger above them, even with death so close, he was acutely aware of every point where they touched. Finally, the footsteps retreated, voices faded, silence settled like dust, but neither of them moved. Nakoha's forehead rested against his collarbone now, her breathing steadier but still fast. His free hand had somehow found her waist, fingers splayed against the leather of her clothing. Silas. Her voice was barely audible. What you said before, about never being with a woman. Not the best time for that conversation. There may not be another time. She lifted her head, and even in the darkness he could feel the intensity of her gaze. They will not stop looking for me. If they find me with you, they will kill us both. Then why did you come here? The answer came not in words but in action. Her lips found his in the darkness, and every thought in his head scattered like leaves in wind. She kissed him with a hunger that took his breath away, her hands moving to his face, his neck, his shoulders. He responded instinctively, pulling her closer, tasting desperation and desire on her lips. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That is why, she said, because in 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness, you are the only thing that has made me feel alive again. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, voice rough. Neither do I anymore. Her fingers traced his jaw in the darkness. But I know I cannot go back to my people, and I know I cannot stop thinking about you. Above them, the house was silent. The warriors were gone, but neither of them moved to leave the cellar. Not yet, because in this small dark space, pressed together with danger all around, something had shifted between them that could not be undone. Nakoha stayed. For 3 days she stayed, and Silas's quiet world became something else entirely. Something charged and alive and terrifying in its intensity. She worked alongside him without being asked, helped him repair the fence the warriors had damaged, hauled water from the well, moved with an efficiency that spoke of hard-earned survival skills. And every moment they spent together, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken things. On the second morning they were in the barn tending to his 2 horses. Silas reached for the bridle at the same moment Nakoha did, and their hands collided. Both froze. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds before they pulled away, but his skin burned where her fingers had brushed his. Sorry, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Do not apologize for touching me. Her voice carried an edge that made him look up. She was watching him with that direct gaze that stripped away pretense. Unless you do not want to. That's not... He stopped, unsure how to finish. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the pulse beating at her throat. You are afraid of wanting me. Why? Because I don't know how to want someone like this. The admission came out raw and honest. Everything I know about you tells me you're dangerous, that I should send you away. But every time I try to think about you leaving, I can't breathe right. Something softened in her expression. She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle against his cheek. You think I am not afraid? I am terrified. 6 months ago I buried the man I thought I would grow old with, swore I would never let anyone close again. And then you appear, with your soft hands and softer heart, and I cannot stop myself from wanting things I have no right to want. What things? Instead of answering, she kissed him, slower this time than in the cellar. Less desperate, more deliberate, learning the shape of his mouth, the taste of him. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a sound low in her throat that sent heat through his entire body. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I want that. Want to feel something other than grief. Want to remember what it is to be touched with gentleness instead of duty. And I want... He trailed off, suddenly shy despite having just kissed her. Say it. I want to know what it feels like to be with someone, to not be alone anymore. His hands tightened on her waist. But more than that, I want it to be you. Not just anyone, you. Nakoha pulled back enough to look at him fully. You make it very hard to keep my walls up, Silas Brennan. Good. He surprised himself with the word, with the confidence behind it. Because you've already torn down all of mine. That evening, they sat on his porch as the sun set, shoulders touching, hands intertwined. Neither spoke much. Didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. Tell me about him, Silas said finally. Your husband. Nakoha was quiet for a long moment. His name was Takoda. Strong hunter. Good man. He died defending our camp from raiders, bled out in my arms while I could do nothing but watch. Her grip on his hand tightened. The tribe expects me to honor his memory by marrying his brother, producing sons to carry on his bloodline, as if I am property to be transferred. You're not property. No, I am not. She turned to look at him. That is why I will not go back. Even if it means being hunted. Even if it means... She stopped, head snapping toward the eastern trees. Silas saw it too. A thin line of smoke rising against the darkening sky. Not from a campfire. From multiple torches. They have brought more warriors, Nakoha said, voice gone flat. They are not searching anymore. They are coming to take me by force. Silas stood, his heart sinking. How many? Too many? She rose beside him, hand going to the knife at her belt. They will not leave without me, and if you stand in their way, they will kill you without hesitation. The torches were moving closer, a line of fire cutting through the growing darkness, coming straight for his ranch, coming for her. And Silas knew that in the next few minutes, he would have to make a choice that would alter the course of his life forever. 7 warriors emerged from the darkness, torches casting harsh shadows across their faces. The lead warrior, the same one from before, stepped forward. His eyes found Nakoha, then moved to Silas with open contempt. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the yard. Nakoha answered, stepping in front of Silas. Her hand stayed on her knife, but she didn't draw it. The warrior barked something else, gesturing sharply at her, then at the forest behind him. What's he saying? Silas asked quietly. That I have shamed my family. That I have dishonored Takoda's memory by refusing his brother. That I must return now, or be declared dead to the tribe. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. He says if I do not come willingly, they will burn this place to the ground with you inside. The warrior spoke again, and this time Silas caught one word repeated, a name. Nakoha's jaw tightened. He says my brother is waiting. Says Takoda's brother has the right to claim me as his wife, that this is not negotiable. Silas looked at the 7 armed warriors, looked at the torches, looked at Nakoha, standing rigid beside him, caught between 2 worlds. Every instinct he had screamed that he should step back, let her go, save himself. He was just one man against 7 trained fighters. He had no chance. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. No. The single syllable cut through the night. The warriors shifted, hands moving to weapons. Nakoha turned to look at him, eyes wide with something that might have been fear or hope or both. Silas, you cannot... I said no. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the warriors. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. She stays here because she wants to, not because I'm forcing her. Not because you're forcing her, because she chose to. The lead warrior's expression darkened. He said something sharp, taking a step forward. The other warriors followed his lead, forming a semicircle around the porch. He says you are a fool, Nakoha translated, her hand gripping the back of his shirt. Says one white man cannot stand against Apache warriors. Says your death will mean nothing. Maybe. Silas's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. But if dying means she gets to choose her own life, then I'll die. Because that's what decent men do. They stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even when they're terrified. Even when they know they'll lose. Nakoha made a sound behind him. Something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand tightened on his shirt. The lead warrior studied Silas for a long moment. Then he spoke again. But this time his tone was different. Less angry. Almost curious. He asked a question. He wants to know why you would die for a woman who is not yours. Nakoha whispered. Silas didn't hesitate. Tell him she is mine, and I'm hers. Tell him we choose each other. When Nakoha translated, Something shifted in the warriors' stances. The lead warrior's eyes moved between Silas and Nakoha, seeing something there that made him pause. He spoke at length, his voice hard, but no longer threatening violence. He says, Nakoha's voice caught. He says, if I choose to stay with you, I can never return. I will be dead to my people. My name will not be spoken. My family will mourn me as if I died. And if I go back, you will be forced to marry Takota's brother, bear his children, live as his property until you die. The choice hung in the air like smoke. Silas could feel the weight of it pressing down on them both. He wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to beg her not to leave. But this had to be her decision, not his, not her brother's, not her tribe's, hers. Nakoha was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then she stepped up beside Silas, her hand finding his and gripping it tight. She looked at the lead warrior and spoke in Apache, her voice clear and strong. The warrior's expression hardened. He responded sharply, but Nakoha cut him off with more words. The two of them went back and forth, voices rising. Finally, the warrior spat something that sounded like a curse and turned away. The other warriors followed, torches disappearing back into the forest. But before the lead warrior vanished completely, he looked back one last time, not at Nakoha, at Silas. And in that look was something that might have been respect. They stood in the yard long after the torches disappeared, hands still clasped, neither speaking. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on them both. Nakoha had chosen exile, had chosen him over everything she had ever known. You did not have to do that, she said finally, her voice rough. Stand in front of me like that. You could have died. I know. Then why? Silas turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, he could see tears tracking down her cheeks, the first time he had seen her cry. Because 6 months ago I buried my father and thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. Thought that was just what my life would be. Empty. Quiet. Safe. He reached up and brushed away one of her tears with his thumb. And then you showed up and made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Made me want things I didn't know how to want. And I realized that safety isn't living. It's just existing. Nakoha closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I have given up everything for this. For you. I know. And I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it. She opened her eyes, and the vulnerability he saw there took his breath away. This strong, fierce woman who had faced down warriors and refused to bend was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted beneath her feet. Take me inside, she whispered. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Nakoha, I need to feel something real, something good. She stopped, swallowing hard. I need you. They barely made it through the door before she was kissing him, hands in his hair, body pressed against his with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. He responded instinctively, backing her toward the stairs, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. Slow down, she murmured against his mouth, even as her hands pulled at his shirt. We have time now, all the time we need. They made it to his bedroom, and suddenly the urgency shifted into something else, something tender. Nakoha's hands slowed as she unbuttoned his shirt, fingers tracing the planes of his chest with a gentleness that made him shiver. He touched her in return, fumbling with the ties of her leather clothing, clumsy but careful. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, voice shaking. Neither do I. She caught his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. My husband and I, we were young when we married. It was duty more than desire, quick and practical like everything else in our lives. I do not know how to do this slowly, how to make it mean something beyond just bodies joining. Then we'll figure it out together. What followed was awkward and fumbling, and utterly perfect in its imperfection. Nakoha guided him with patient hands, showing him where to touch, how to move. He learned the landscape of her body in the darkness, every scar and curve and soft spot. She gasped when he kissed the hollow of her throat, arched into him when his hands found her hips. When they finally came together, she made a sound that was half sob, half moan, and he understood. This wasn't just physical release. This was two people who had been alone too long, finding home in each other, finding comfort, finding peace. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin damp with sweat, breathing hard. Nakoha's head rested on his chest, his hand moving slowly up and down her spine. Neither spoke for a long time. 6 months, she said finally, voice quiet. 6 months I thought I would never feel this again. Thought I would carry grief and anger until they killed me. And then you appeared with your soft heart and your impossible courage. And everything changed. Silas pressed a kiss to her hair. I was so afraid. I know. I could feel you shaking. She lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes was something warm and soft that he had never seen before. But you did it anyway. That is what bravery is. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. My father used to say that. He was a wise man. She settled back against his chest, fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. What happens now, Silas? I cannot go back. My people will not come for me again, but I am alone in this world except for you. Then we build something new. Together. He tightened his arms around her. Stay here. Help me run this ranch. We'll make it work. Somehow. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we've both been making it harder than it needs to be by trying to do everything alone. He felt her smile against his chest. Besides, I need someone who actually knows how to fix a fence properly. I've been doing it wrong for months. Her laugh was soft and genuine, and he realized it was the first time he had heard her truly laugh. The sound of it filled something inside him he hadn't known was empty. 3 months passed like water running through fingers. The ranch that had been Silas's prison of solitude became something else entirely. A home, a life, a future he had never dared to imagine. Nakoha moved through the property with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She had repaired the fences properly, showing Silas techniques he had never learned, had expanded the garden, planting herbs and vegetables in patterns she remembered from her childhood, had turned the empty spare room into a workspace where she crafted leather goods they could trade at the distant settlement. Silas watched her one morning from the porch, coffee cup warm in his hands. She was in the corral with the horses, her movements fluid and certain as she worked with the mare that had been skittish since his father died. Under Nakoha's patient guidance, the animal was gentling, learning to trust again. Like him, he was different now, could feel it in the way he carried himself, the way he no longer flinched at his own shadow, the way he could look at his reflection and see someone who had chosen courage over safety, who had stood up to warriors when every instinct screamed to run, who had learned what it meant to truly be with another person, body and soul. Nakoha looked up and caught him watching. Her mouth curved in that small smile that still made his heart stumble. She walked over, climbing the porch steps and settling beside him on the bench he had built 2 weeks ago. Her shoulder pressed against his in comfortable familiarity. You are staring again, she said, taking his coffee and stealing a sip. Can't help it. Still can't believe you're real. I am very real. She handed back the cup, her fingers lingering on his. And I am not going anywhere. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. In the distance, birds called to each other. The horses moved peacefully in the corral. Everything was still and right in a way it had never been before. Do you regret it? Silas asked quietly. Giving up everything? Nakoha was silent for a moment, considering. I gave up a life where I had no voice, no choice, where I would have been passed from one man to another like a possession. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear and certain. What I found here is worth more than everything I left behind. I found freedom. I found partnership. I found a man who sees me as an equal, not a burden or a prize. I found the same thing. He set down the coffee cup and took her hand in both of his. You saved me. You know, I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to me. And then you crashed into my world and made me realize that life only happens if you're brave enough to reach for it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We saved each other. A month later, they stood together in the evening light, surveying the ranch that had grown under their combined efforts. The fences were strong. The garden thrived. The horses were healthy and well-trained. They had built something real, something that would last. Silas pulled Nakoha close, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she had always belonged there. My father used to tell me that a man's wealth isn't measured in gold or land. It's measured in the moments that take his breath away. And I'm the richest man alive. She laughed, the sound warm and full, and kissed him as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire. In that kiss was everything they had been through. All the fear and courage and choice and consequence. All the loneliness that had been transformed into connection. They had both been broken in different ways. Both been alone. Both been trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. But together, they had built something neither could have created alone. A life chosen freely. A love earned through vulnerability and trust. And in the end, that was worth more than any kingdom either had left behind. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and desire reshape destinies in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.